Welcome to today's webinar, Private Fleets Premium Solutions, How to Find the Best Value Fleet Management Software, presented by AssetWorks. I'm Lauren Fletcher, VP of Content for Bobbit, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we get started, I do want to take a moment to encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to answer them all. But if we don't get to yours, don't worry, you'll be contacted by email with a response after the event. I'm joined by our speaker today, Thomas Mayer, Professional Services Delivery Manager for AssetWorks. Thomas, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Lauren.
Let's go ahead and get right on into it. Take over.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So again, welcome to the webinar. Today, we're going to cover Private Fleets Premium Solutions, Finding the Best Value Fleet Management Software. As Lauren noted, I am Thomas Mayer. So the Professional Services Delivery Manager here at AssetWorks. While I've been here for a little over 5 years in this role, I have been in the software implementation space for over a decade, managing different types of software across multiple industries. Today, we're going to cover a couple of different topics. So we're going to start by talking about common challenges that private fleets are facing every day. Then we're going to move into comparing and selecting a fleet management software to help work through those challenges. Ultimately, talk about effective implementation and wrapping up with ongoing support and scalability of an application to your organization. So, like I mentioned, we're going to start by talking about the three main challenges that private fleets are facing every day. And things that you're going to want to leverage a software to help you manage. So the three that we're going to focus on are going to be cost control, both managing costs and finding where money can be saved, operational efficiency, making sure that your workflows as well as your organization are operating optimally and bringing efficiency to inefficient workflows, and then compliance and safety. With the ever-changing world that we live in, regulations from the federal, state, and local level, compliance and safety, it has to be top of mind in every part of your organization, but specifically in fleet management. So first, we're going to talk about costs and managing those costs. So oftentimes, we focus on money simply because it's the number one thing that every business relies on, right? But how do we run into these problems and how do we face them? Multiple different strategies across the organization. But when we talk specifically about fleet, you're really going to come down to your maintenance programs, your fuel management, and then maximizing the utilization of the things you own, right? So maintenance optimization, what does that mean? Well, how are we managing when we're creating work orders? What kinds of work orders are we doing? What kinds of activities does our shop perform? And what things are we outsourcing? All of those things are going to impact the costs of doing that type of business. Anything inside a fleet is going to be very heavily influenced by fuel. Everything you own in a fleet uses a type of fuel. But don't forget, it's not just gas or diesel. There's things like propane. Electricity is a fuel. Managing electricity is huge. As electrification starts to take hold, we need to be able to understand how we're consuming that and how we're managing that type of fuel alongside our liquid fuels. And then ultimately asset utilization. This is something that whenever you're looking at what you own and the makeup of your fleet, how are we utilizing the things we have? And ultimately, does it make sense to own a specialized piece of equipment, or are we outsourcing certain work because we're not using things and maintaining those specialized pieces of equipment are really costing us more money than it's saving? A couple of challenges whenever we're looking into these things are going to be price volatility, especially in recent history as we've seen labor costs increase, parts costs increase. Those things are costing us more money. And now our organization has to adjust to that and say, are we purchasing more or are we outsourcing more? How are we managing these inflated costs and things just costing more money? And then hidden costs, obviously popping up out of the blue, it's never a good time to have an accident. But managing those kinds of costs, again, outsourcing certain types of work inside of our fleet might make more sense. If it costs more money for us to own specialized equipment to manage things, does it make more sense just to send that out or have a vendor do some work for us, managing those types of hidden costs. Our second challenge is efficiency. And this is one area that software really needs to be a focus, because operational efficiency is going to lead into better cost control, right? Where are we inefficient in our workflows? Where are we inefficient in different parts of our business? What are we doing manually that we could leverage something like a software product to automate, to help us manage, to make things more repeatable, just again, maximizing that productivity of our workforce and making something work for us instead of us working for it. So when we're talking about efficiency, we're looking at things in the fleet world like route optimization. If I'm managing a bunch of garbage trucks and they're going in an inefficient route, I am burning labor time, I am using extra fuel that I don't need to be using, and I'm not delivering the top level of customer service. Those are inefficient processes. So making sure that we're planning a route for anything that does go out into that world. Same thing for, let's say, transit, right? I'm sending out buses. I want to make sure my routes make sense. Are there heavy intersections that I have to cross multiple times? Does it make more sense to have multiple crossings or just one? How am I optimizing my travel time and ultimately my fuel use? Instead of idling at an intersection, can I go a different route? Driver management is also a huge way to bring efficiency into our operation, because they're the ones that are driving the vehicles. So if they're being inefficient with their performance, fast accelerations, heavy braking, very quick turning, distracted driving, causing accidents, those are things that we need to focus on that can help us save money and be more efficient. And then, as I mentioned a second ago, the utilization of our fleet comes into focus here, simply because does it make sense for us to use resources to manage a specialty piece of equipment, or outsourcing something like that? Or are we overutilizing equipment that we should have something more specialized that will then bring longevity to some of the pieces of equipment that we do use on a regular basis? And then our third challenge is going to be compliance and safety. So again, as I mentioned, there are regulations and government agencies across the board that bring all sorts of compliance needs into a fleet, from the DOT to state and local government, things like electrification plans and what types of assets you can buy, EPA and emission standards. Do you have to do a smog inspection every 90 days? Do you have to do a state inspection so often on your equipment and submit those things in there? So not only navigating all of those compliance rules, but also then managing the data on the back end. How and where do I keep those certifications? How do I prove that I've done these inspections? Where do I store that information and the proof that I've done it? And so that if somebody comes knocking and they have a question, I can give those things away. And then ultimately, the safety of our people. So whenever we're talking about compliance, those things all come around safety, either safety for the environment with emissions, or safety for our drivers and other people on the road with inspections to make sure that equipment is safe to operate. So managing our employees and then managing the training that they have. Are my technicians certified to work on these types of equipment? Are they able to do specialty jobs? And again, where do I store that information? How can I find it? How can I prove that it exists? So not only keeping that data, but then monitoring it. Your software should help you manage all of those things. And all three of these challenges are going to be the key areas we're going to focus on as we talk about how do I go about selecting a piece of software to manage my fleet. So we know what's challenging us. Now we want to focus in on what am I going to require out of a software to help me manage this information. So to start off, choosing the right software for your organization is obviously paramount. You need to make the decision that brings the software to you that's going to help optimize your efficiencies, to bring automation where you need it, and also to maximize your return on investment. Buying a piece of fleet management software is not a small task. It's not buying a new refrigerator. It's going to take time and money to set this thing up. So we need to make sure that it is both addressing what I currently need. I need a software to help me manage my preventative maintenance, but it also is going to be something that supports you growing into the system and with the system. And ultimately, that is the biggest piece of this. You are going to need to have features that are already in existence that you can then begin to use after you've gotten familiar with it. And you also want to find a product that is consistently growing with the industry and the technology so that whenever you do need a new feature, it's already there. Because if you're in front of your software, it's not going to work for you in the long term. So what are some things we should talk about whenever we're looking for a fleet software? Well, first off, we can talk a little bit about managing where our assets are. So some ideas around tracking where things operate, be it geofencing, setting up an area where a thing works, right? This is where this truck works, operates. This is where this bulldozer should be. This is the job site. Allows you to then maybe get notifications whenever it leaves that area. So that keeps you in the loop on where things are. It lets you track if things are moving around where you don't anticipate them moving. And it also allows you to really dial into how things are being utilized. The other side of that would be the real-time tracking of the other information for that piece of equipment. So things like idle time, meter usage, or even diagnostic codes that get thrown whenever something happens. The check engine light comes on, being able to know what that code is and understand it and know what needs to be done to repair it. Your fleet software should manage your maintenance. And I know that sounds a little bit self-explanatory, but ultimately, this is what you're going to spend the most time in any fleet maintenance software doing. You're going to be creating work orders, managing work orders, reviewing work orders. You're going to say the word work order 1,000 times. So your software should be really good at managing work orders. A couple of key things that you should really take into consideration are automated scheduling. So we know about preventative maintenance, right? We know we need to change our oil every 6,000 miles. We know we need to rotate our tires. We know we need to do these inspections. All of that should be functionality that a software brings to the table, where you can put in some pieces of information and it says, yes, I'm going to do this piece of maintenance on this interval or in this date range or both, or maybe even by fuel consumption and tell you whenever it's going to happen, right? That's preventative maintenance. But a software, to my point of growing with technology, should also at this point be looking into tools to be predictive and using things like AI and machine learning to really take data, analyze it, and tell you when something's going to break before it breaks. Based on my driver behavior, based on the area that something is operating in, based on the history of maintenance on this piece of equipment, your brakes are going to fail in 2 weeks. So you need to bring that in and get ahead of that, right? Turning repairs and reactive maintenance into preventative maintenance using technology to predict those things are going to happen. Next up, again, are operators. So while we're managing our assets through maintenance programs and real-time tracking of diagnostic codes, we also need to be leveraging software to help manage our drivers, making sure that they're safe and operating our equipment effectively and efficiently and safely. Things like speeding, harsh braking, taking off quickly, long idle times, right? Are they going and sitting in a drive-through for 3 hours? We don't want that. It's going to be harmful to the engine. So managing the driver behavior, distracted drivers, right? If we have somebody who's constantly texting while they're driving, we want to know that because they're more likely to cause an accident than someone who is 10 and 2 and, fully engaged. And then ultimately, coming back into our compliance and regulation discussion, managing that information, keeping those logs of when my state inspection was, when my SPONG inspection was, all of the readings and test results that come with that. I did my oil sample, here's my results. I did my nozzle hose test, here's my test results. I did my tire pressure test, here's my test results. And then ultimately employee training as well. This employee is certified here, there's a certification. Managing all of that in a software allows you to do a simple search and pull those certifications or even deliver that information electronically via email far simpler than going to a file cabinet and digging through some paperwork that might get lost or sitting on someone's desk. So you should be looking at a software that can help you manage your drivers alongside of your equipment to the same extent. Now, fuel is another huge part of fleets. As I mentioned earlier, your fleet maintenance software needs to help you manage fuel. It has to. Everything in a fleet uses some kind of fuel, right? So your software should be doing that with you, whether it be internally managing your fuel, doing tanks and pumps, managing those transactions, how much fuel's in a tank, how many people are getting fuel, when they're getting it, the meter readings, all of those things. So internal, measuring your consumption, so whenever you need to order new fuel, as well as when different pieces of equipment are getting fuel, how much they're getting, all of that stuff. But what about your commercial transactions? If I go and get gas at a commercial facility, that's not internal to my fleet software, but I need to know I got that fuel. If my preventative maintenance program is going off of fuel consumption, and now all of a sudden I need to know every time I get gas, right? Because if I don't take into consideration those transactions, now my program's off and I'm not really being preventative. So you should have the ability to manage those kinds of external transactions, whether it be a direct interface to a card system like WEX, or its own card that is from the software and from the company that automatically integrates in all of those transactions for you. So it's nice and seamless. You have to take into consideration all of your fuel transactions, not just the ones that you manage internally, your own fuel tanks. And then finally, another thing we're considering in this selection process is going to be our utilization and lifecycle management for our assets. So tracking how often we're using a piece of equipment, all the maintenance costs that go into it historically, whether it be accident damage or just wear and tear, and all those preventative costs, and then ultimately the total lifecycle costs for owning it. So I know whenever I need to replace it, how much I should be expecting to spend on the next iteration, or the research I need to do when I do go buy something to replace it. Well, we've had history of issues with, fleet equipment type X. Well, maybe we should look at alternatives because we seem to really have a lot of costs that get sunk into this type of this bus, right? So managing the total cost of ownership, understanding that, giving you that information, and then helping you with that life cycle planning based on the maintenance cost of this equipment and the depreciation, and maybe some replacement planning that you do internally with costs there. When should I replace this thing? And does it make sense to buy a new one or keep maintaining this existing one, right? If I just keep putting duct tape on the outside, is it going to last another 4 years and save me a bunch of money? Or does it make sense to cut my losses now, buy a brand new one that's going to get me another 10 or 15? So your software should be tracking that information as well. That's going to help us with all of our challenges, right, that we were just discussing, from cost savings all the way through our fuel consumption and regulations. Okay, so we know what we want out of the software, and we know what our challenges are. But now when I'm in the market and I'm looking at all these options of fleet maintenance software, well, how do I compare different ones across the board, right? I know the features I want. Everybody says they do X, Y, and Z. How do I really start that comparison and make an educated decision? So your first look at a piece of software, you should be looking at a couple of high-level things. First and foremost, how does it look? Is it user-friendly? Does it feel like you're in an early 2000s website, or maybe earlier? Or does it feel like it's up to date? It's been built in the most recent decade, and it's going to be user friendly, because that's ultimately how your day-to-day people are going to interact with it, is through that interface. Or is your organization going to embrace this software, this application, or are they going to feel like it's antiquated or out of date or just doesn't work for them? Or is it too difficult to manage, so people are going to find workarounds and ultimately subvert the entire reason that you're going with the platform? So your first look at it should really be, does this look and feel the way I anticipate and the way that I want and my organization wants a fleet software to look. You should also investigate the customization options within an application. Now, whenever you go out and buy a commercial application, it's coming off the shelf, right? You'll hear that term a lot. And that means that it's built the way it's built. But there should be wiggle room there to allow you to specify certain aspects of workflows. A good example being, who can open a work order in my organization? It shouldn't be it has to be this user. You should have some ability to say, well, I have service writers and they're the ones that create these. So this group of people can create them. And I don't want, my technicians just maybe manage them. They don't create new work orders. So I want to turn that functionality off for them. And then I want to have, this person do X, Y, or Z, or maybe it's both or some combination, right? There's always going to be those workflow examples. Those are very key because you want your software to work for you, not you work for it, right? And you also want it to be flexible because you might do something one way today, in 30, 60, 90 days, in 1 to 5 years, all of that could change. And being able to go and check a box instead of buying a new software is going to save you a lot of money. And then the third piece of functionality is going to be your mobile access. So obviously everything is connected to the internet all the time now. We're all mobile. There's 1,000 devices that can do everything. You want to have your software available to you at all times. And if you aren't in the software when you're doing the job, you're not getting real-time data. Your reporting is going to be behind. Your decision-making is going to be behind. And that's ultimately going to be inefficient. So tying back into bringing operational efficiency, you want something that has the ability to be on a mobile device, whether it be a phone or a tablet or a smart fridge, whatever you want. You should be able to get to your software and you should be able to manage your work or whatever the case may be, pull reports, all that stuff. The next piece is going to be cost. And obviously, whenever you find a couple, you're going to go out there and look, and you're going to find some options. You're going to see a couple that look great. These look like some great things. So you're going to narrow it down. And then you're going to start to dig in. And the first thing you're probably going to start to ask questions about is, how much is this going to cost me? What is my total cost of ownership to go with the solution? But I want you to consider there's more than just buying a piece of software. There's different pieces of that purchase. First, there's always the upfront licensing or subscription fee. If you're with a software as a solution platform, you're going to have a subscription fee. If you are deploying this on your own hardware, you're going to have a license that you're going to pay for software. That's the nature of software. That's only one piece of the cost. Your next piece is going to be your implementation and setup. And while that is a one-time cost, and it can definitely inflate the sticker for purchasing a piece of software, that's going to tell you a lot about that piece of software itself. Because if you come in and I want to buy something and they say it's only going to cost $20 to get this thing set up, that means it's probably not as flexible as I thought, or it might not be as functional as I thought, and not have the things for me to grow into it as my business grows, as my business changes to what I was speaking to earlier. So you do want to find something that is scalable. Another reason that's important, obviously there on the slide, right, to avoid doing upgrades or moving or buying new software, buying new modules, buying all these things, right? So you want to find something that's going to answer all of your questions, your current needs, and some of your very near-term wants. And we'll talk about setting goals in an implementation here in a couple of slides. But that's ultimately going to be how you're going to make some of these decisions. So you want to find something that scales to your business, that helps you grow, and you can grow with it. And then the final piece inside of cost is going to be your support and your training. So if it's going to take me 5 minutes to train you to do something, it's probably a simple workflow. But if I need to be in your office for a week teaching you how to manage all of these different aspects of a piece of software, it's a function and feature-rich application that's going to give you a lot of options. So the level of effort when it comes to those training engagements, and then ultimately the support after you've implemented, right? Because the goal isn't just for this first year where I'm doing an implementation or what have you, but ultimately I'm going to be wondering about, hey, what happens 2 years from now, 5 years from now, whenever I get a new user and they run into a problem, right? So that's definitely something to compare as well whenever you're narrowing down your search is what level of effort do I get after the fact? So upfront cost, of course, is going to be, the big number. It's going to say it's going to cost you this much to have a subscription, this much to set it up. But then what happens after? Where do I go from there? What does my money get me in the long term over the course of time, not just today whenever I'm looking to make that purchase? Now, another important piece to consider whenever you're comparing is going to be, how does this integrate with other pieces of software? Every company has multiple platforms. We're a software company and we have multiple platforms that we manage our business with. And if they don't integrate effectively, you're going to create double entry or manual entry. And that's, again, taking away the automation, taking away the operational efficiencies that you're trying so hard to pull out of the business. So making sure that a platform can integrate and understanding what makes sense to integrate with a fleet software, right? And specific to private fleets, you're mainly going to be concerned with your purchase orders and your inventory side, because that's where a lot of our costs go, right? And buying inventory and all of these things, I need to make sure that I'm paying my vendors and all of these things are staying in line. I need to make sure that I'm up to date with my ERP, so that whenever I'm building all these costs and sending them out, I'm recouping appropriately all of those costs. And then again, anything with accounting, going back and forth, making sure I have all the correct account codes, all the right vendor records, maybe HR, making sure I have all the right employees, right? So any part of your business that really is going to hinge into your fleet software, it's always worth exploring the integration side. And you also want to evaluate the type of integration that a software can provide. So APIs are, the latest and greatest, the current way that, software should be integrating, and you want your fleet maintenance software to do the same thing. APIs give you a lot of options when it comes to very specific workflows in an interface, pulling customization and all of that into how these two things talk, the information that goes back and forth, and really making that a very smooth transition. So integration capabilities, costs, and then your features and functions from user friendliness and how it looks through that support side. Those are a lot of the things you're going to focus on whenever you're trying to make that decision. So I've considered all of these options. I've made a selection. I've decided to implement this. How do I, as a private company, with my fleet, implement this effectively to make sure that I'm getting the biggest bang for my buck, I'm getting what I paid for, and I'm setting myself up for success? Because there's short-term gains, but we really need to also think about the long term. So every implementation is going to follow a couple of steps, regardless of the software. And they're really important for us to as a private fleet, to consider and make sure we're doing these appropriately. So first up is always going to be planning and prep. You're always going to start there, right? So you're going to have major selection. The vendor is going to say, hey, we're ready to start the project, and you need to be ready to go. The first thing that we want to do is define objectives and more specifically establish goals. And when it comes to a project, especially fleet implementation, a goal is not, I want to be live by January 1st. That's a timeline. That's not a goal. A goal should be, I want to automate my preventative maintenance. A goal should be, I need better fuel management. A goal should be, I need to have a way to improve efficiencies in this workflow, automate things that are not currently automated. Those are your goals. Your goals then push into the project, and that's going to shape the entire implementation. Because without those goals clearly defined up front, you get to January 1st and you deploy and you go, well, I think we could have done this better. I think we could have done this differently. This isn't what I anticipated we would be doing today. And that's because we didn't have a clear goal. So establishing those goals up front, being very, very keyed in to what I'm looking for the software to do for me is the most important piece of this, getting off on the right foot, if you will. Next up is forming a team. Who's going to be involved in this implementation? And this is something that we talk about at the beginning of every implementation. Who should be there? Who should be at the table? And ultimately, it comes down to three key people. People from the business, end users, be it one or two. We need decision makers from the fleet. So typically a fleet manager, right, understands the business, but also understands the workflows, can make the decisions that need to be made when setting up a software. And then IT support. Even if you're in a hosted environment or a SaaS subscription, you need your IT support because they're going to manage things like APIs and interfaces. They're going to manage things like users and back-end administrative functions within a software. So making sure they're in the team, our decision makers, and then our end users. There also needs to be people that can be pulled in for specific areas. Let's say finance members, inventory folks, things like that will be consulted at specific parts. But these three key people and types of people are going to be the entirety of a project. The last piece is going to be setting a realistic timeline and an implementation plan for both allocation of resources and money and mitigating risks. And ultimately what that means is if you're going to have a timeline, everybody wants to go quick. Everybody wants to go live as soon as you can. We all understand that. But there's a process you should follow, and you want to do your diligence in each phase of a project, and that you should really break it down into these steps. This is how I'm setting up the beginning. This is how I'm setting up the middle. This is how I'm setting up the end. If you try to take a holistic timeline, you're going to open yourself up for risks. A great example being the month of December, right? If you're planning a project that goes into the month of December, you really only have 12 to 14 working days. People take vacations, there's national holidays. It's a really difficult month to schedule things. And so you're not going to have a ton of effort done in that timeline. So, that's going to be, definitely key. Next one up is going to be our migration and implementation of the actual system. So going through the actual process here and, really getting into the nitty gritty. So from managing your data, obviously that's going to be top of mind for sure. Anytime you're going from one platform or maybe just paper into a new application, data is going to be the piece that takes the most time, and you're going to spend the most time on it. And, it's always key to think about those specific things where, like, how are you going to handle, Chevrolet, right? Is it Chevy, Chevrolet, Chevrolet, if you can't spell it like me? You might be looking at data that you pull out of a system, and you can, you're going to have to make a decision on how we're going to standardize that. Next up is going to be whenever we start talking about, integrating with existing systems. So, again, if we're going the API route, how that goes, and, how compatible are we with these other systems? Interfaces are always, the most technical side of any implementation with a software. You go through the process of mapping data and, building out these specifications. Development has to happen. So whenever you get into that piece, it's ultimately, a lot about compatibility. And then the third piece in your kind of middle portion of data migration and actual implementation is going to be actually testing. So testing things like interfaces, obviously very important, but also testing the actual application. What happens when I click this button? How do I do a work order, and do I run into any workflow issues now that I've configured all these things? Does my interface actually work whenever I say go and it goes? So thorough testing of all the bits and pieces is definitely huge before you can really move on to the next phase. And again, talking about setting up a timeline and doing these phases, you've gone through phase one, now we're through phase two, we're going to step into phase three. Phase three being training and onboarding. So we're going to have gone through all these steps, and we've gotten to the point where I put all my data in. I've built these interfaces. We've done workflows. What happens? How do my people actually learn how to do this? Well, you're going to have this broken out by different roles and different workflows. So from your technicians who are building work orders and driving labor, all the way through, store folks, storekeepers who are doing your inventory transactions, making purchase orders, maybe billing admins, right? All these different parts of the business are going to have to be in there managing it. They're going to have to learn this new program. So what does that look like? Obviously, each organization is going to have its own flavor of how it wants to do training, from in-person classroom style, online remote trainings, maybe record them, or somewhere in between, right? So understanding how your organization handles training and then building that into your fleet software rollout. The schedule is always going to be the hardest part. Again, managing people's calendars is quite difficult, especially in specific areas of the year. But understanding how we're rolling this out and how you're going to train all the people as they come in and they're going to interact with the system. And again, depending on the size of your business, how expansive geographically is it? Do we have to go to multiple locations, multiple cities? Do we go with one city first or one location first and then come to 2 and 3? Do we do a big bang, everybody at once? These are all things you have to consider whenever you're going through that phase of the project. And then ultimately, your ongoing support. Again, implementation is one piece of this. And after implementation has happened, training has happened, the project itself has come to a close, but now you're just living life in this new application. How do you have access to support being internal? Do I have technicians come to an internal resource and they reach out to a help desk? How do those end users provide the feedback and come back in? These are all things that you need to have a plan for, and your software vendor should be providing that, because ultimately they have a support system, I hope, and you want to utilize that. They should be able to tell you, this is your best practice, to bring questions to us to get these things. So to kind of summarize a bit of what we just talked about, going through an implementation, these are the big things that I just kind of hit on as far as what the pitfalls are, and ultimately the things we need to make sure we aren't doing. So just again, recap, making sure we're planning appropriately. We're putting a timeline together, but it's realistic. We are planning to spend time in certain areas like data gathering and conversion, like training, because ultimately that's how we're going to succeed, is making sure the right data is in there and the people know how to use it. The software is going to succeed. Those two things can really be a detriment if we don't efficiently plan those. The data quality, again, if you bring in bad data, that's what you got. Everybody's heard the term garbage in, garbage out. And that is because if I just copy and paste bad data, I have bad data again. And that's not the reason that you're coming to a new fleet platform. You're coming because of those other goals, because you want to improve efficiencies, and efficiency means good data. Lean operates well. Bad data, it's not going to operate well. Lack of engagement is a huge one, especially for projects that take a long time. Your fleet platform could take months to implement, right? It's a big software. It's a lot. You're managing a lot of pieces of equipment. So over time, it's hard for people to stay engaged. Everybody else has their day jobs. So while we might be in a meeting talking about a piece of software, there could be, a bus that's down that we need to get back out because it's causing us problems. There could be, an employee situation that needs to be taken care of by our managers, but they're, talking about how we're going to code our fleet equipment numbers. So it is hard to keep that engagement, but the business needs to be behind the people that are on the project and making sure that they are able to allocate the time. And then ultimately making sure that the training is comprehensive for each individual role. The people know how to do their job before we deploy the software. Making sure that we're testing thoroughly, again, not just interfaces and integrations, but the actual core functionality. Get in there, touch it, feel it, make sure it works before we sign off and say, this is great, let's do it. You got to spend time testing, and any implementation should have a dedicated testing phase that you go through to make sure that these things are ready to go. And then not planning for that post-implementation phase. So again, there should always be a plan for implementation's over, what happens? Your implementation consultant and from the vendor steps away because their job has been fulfilled. Now where do we go? And having a plan, having a documented process, whether that be a memo to the company or some other way, letting people know how to manage questions at this point. So up until here, I've been speaking a little bit about just in general a fleet platform. I want to take a moment to talk about implementation of Fleet Focus here at AssetWorks. So we just talked about these three main phases of implementation, right? So step one, planning. Well, that's initiation and discovery for us. So every project starts with a kickoff call. That means we get all the stakeholders on a meeting. We talk about the project. We talk about your goals. Specifically, we want to know what you want out of the software. We talk about the scope, what we said we were going to do. We talk about the timeline so that everybody understands where we're at. We can make those adjustments up front. We can start off on the right foot. Discovery is us meeting with you to understand your current business. Because if we don't know where you are, we don't know how to get you where you want to go. So we want to drive those conversations and say, how do you do this right now? Because we need to know what we need to make the same. And we also need to know what you want to change. So if there's a workflow that is, we have to do it this way because of X, and that can't ever change, we need to know that. But we also need to know this is always annoying. And we really want to have a better way to manage our external fuel, right? I wish we had a way to bring in those commercial transactions. Spoiler alert, we do. Then we talked about step two, right? So step two is that implementation, the data migration. That's going to be our design and build. So design starts off with going through our application and talking about all the fields and all the data that we have and that you can bring in. What do we mean when we talk about departments? What do we mean when we talk about part manufacturers? How does that work? Where does it live? All those fun things. We talk about that in depth. And we also review what we call our starter database. So all of our applications, whenever we install them, come with what we call the starter database. And that is a predefined list of a lot of the standard codes that we've seen over the years with all of our customers. So we've developed this best practice list of most of the pieces in the application that can really speed things along and can bring standardization to places that you might not have it currently, and bring those efficiencies. So we have those, it's pre-built in, it's there. We review that information. You're talking about tasks on work orders. Do you want to use VMRS codes? Because it comes preloaded with VMRS codes. Can you change those? Absolutely. Can you just blow them all away and do a whole new customized thing? Of course. But if you want to go with that, it's already there. We knocked it out. There's a checkbox, done. And then build is where we bring in the data and we do that walkthrough. We have, a process of gathering data, putting it into a specific form. We review that with you so we understand the data that you want to bring in and help you find standardization and efficiencies there. And again, based on those discovery conversations, know, okay, we need to have this here or this needs to look this way, so that we can effectively build those workflows. And that's the other side of build, is workflow configuration, talking about all the settings and all those checkboxes and cool stuff, and custom interface development. So whether it be utilizing our APIs to build custom interfaces between applications, or our in-house development team to build custom interfaces using other technology, we span both of those options and we can manage that that process there and build. Then step 3 was training and onboarding. That's train, test, and deployment. So training and testing, obviously, right? We go through a functional test phase. We have a standard list of test scripts that walk you through the different corners of the application and allow you to test workflows. And this is after your data is there. So my data is in the system. Now I want to know what happens when I click the boxes. I want to see my workflows. I want to know that it works. I want to click start and something starts. I want to click finish and something finishes. That's the testing phase. We train you how to test. We have tools to test. We give you those tools. We do that dedicated testing. Then we do user training. We have standardized training materials as well as training agendas. That's an on-site event. We show up. We want to train your people in person in a classroom, give you that hands-on learning. Ultimately, deployment. That's go live for another term that a lot of people hear. Obviously there's planning before that. We do some data loading to get things up to speed, to make sure everything's ready to go, put in up-to-date odometer readings. We turn on the telematics devices. We let all the integrations run, and then you're live and you're using the application. Again, that's another on-site week for us in professional services. We want to be there for that very first week or two, depending, and be there on site. So we're with the people using the application. We're over the shoulder job shadowing. We're troubleshooting live right there in that most critical time whenever you're really starting to embrace it. And we want to be there to help and celebrate. And then ultimately, post-implementation support, we always include time after the fact to allow our implementation team to still be engaged. They just spent the better part of a year with you, and they know your business. So whenever you have a problem, we want them to help answer it. Ultimately, at some point, we have what's called a customer care handoff, which is where our support department gets on the phone with you and our professional services team, where we have a what's called a handoff meeting. We provide a lot of information to the customer care department. They introduce themselves. They walk you through the process of creating support tickets and how that support works. They make sure that everybody in your organization that needs to have access does, that you can get to the site, that you understand the process. So we make sure that handoff is very detailed, lots of good information there. It's not just go talk to support. We want to make sure that you understand how to do that, who those people are, the team that you're dealing with, because again, we were just a part of your life for a better part of a year. So that's the implementation process that we use on all of our projects. That wraps me up. So at this point, I can pause for any questions.
Thomas, thank you so much. We do have just a few minutes remaining, so we will answer a few of those questions that have come up during the presentation. Just a reminder, if you got so caught up in listening and didn't get a chance to drop a question in, you do still have an opportunity. And if we don't get around to it today, you will get an email response. So I'm going to go jump right on into these questions. We do have one. This is a bit of a long one. It's got 2 parts. So we'll see what you can do with this. But first part of this one is, how does AssetWorks integrate with SAP to streamline asset management, maintenance schedules, procurement, financial processes, including real-time data synchronization, asset lifecycle management, and reporting? That's the first part of that question.
Great. I'm excited for part 2 too. No, it's a great question. Obviously, SAP, a massive software, right? It touches every part of a business. But from our perspective, our tools allow us to integrate with any ERP. SAP has their own list of API endpoints, which is phenomenal. That means we can utilize those to do interfaces. The nice thing about our products is we are able to build interfaces to mimic any workflow that a human could do. So whether it be creating new assets, you create one in SAP and it gets created in Fleet Focus, or the other way around. Employee management, vendor management, purchase order requisition management, billing management, any parts of SAP's business, we can integrate to that module. And again, either leveraging APIs or custom defined, either MaxQ or standard interface, depending on the product. Not to get into the weeds too much there, but yeah, great question. We can definitely integrate with any part of SAP. with any workflow that might be out there.
Awesome. And for the second half of that question, what best practices or challenges should be considered for seamless integration and workflow setup?
Phenomenal question. So we have a pretty robust process when we go through interface specification and development. We have a couple documents that our technical team walks through to make sure we're covering the business needs, the rules, any testing scenarios that we're going to need to have, and then ultimately the technical stuff that will eventually be developed. So we incorporate best practices there so that we're checking off all those boxes. We're fully understanding what needs to happen. The other piece of that is then whenever an interface is developed by us, before it goes out of development, it goes into our QA team. Our QA team then tests the interface backwards and forwards, all the test scenarios. And then from there, it actually is an internal testing with the person who wrote the spec document, our technical implementation consultant, and the developer. And then it goes for testing, in the test environment for a customer. So yeah, ultimately best practices is testing to make sure it hits all the areas an interface needs, and it does what we expect it to do. And in our standard process, there's 4 or 5 different testing checkpoints.
Fantastic. Next question that I've got in here. What type of ongoing and long-term support does AssetWorks offer?
Yeah, so we have obviously a full support team, customer care, full department. They are specialized to different products that we offer. So those people are, when you put in a question for one product, it's going to that team. So that's our ongoing long-term support. But we also offer things like the AssetWorks Academy, which is a yearly event where customers can come and get some in-person training. Our professional services team is there. We do, over 100 classes at the Academy on all the different parts of the applications. You get to spend one-on-one time with the team there, from sales to professional services, customer care, support, development. Most of our company is there. It's always a great time. And so that's, a nice yearly event to come and get some support. And then the third piece of that, it would be professional services. We can always be engaged to do follow-up trainings, to help troubleshoot current issues and things like that. So scheduling time with us is also something that we do provide. And we have a whole list of services that professional services can do, following after long term, I guess.
Awesome. And another one that just came in from our audience. How does AssetWorks utilize telematics, either through in-house telematics hardware or third-party providers?
Sure. So both. So we do have our own in-house telematics, AssetWorks GPS, which we obviously have developed on our own. So we do have our own product there, as well as we do support other telematics providers, Samsara, Geotab, CalAmp, what we call the telematics cloud, which allows us to partner with other telematics providers to bring in data into the application, much like AssetWorks GPS would. AssetWorks GPS is a full suite GPS provider. It does the same functions and more than a Samsara and a Geotab. It has its own UI where you can go in and view all the real-time data, see where things are, see how fast things were going, and all of that driver behavior stuff, including cameras and the telematics devices in an asset.
Wonderful. And the next one we've got in here, how does your implementation process differ for private fleets compared to public fleets?
So private fleets are going to be very cost conscious, and we completely understand that. Margins for running a business are different, private versus public sector. So we definitely like to focus on maintaining, those cost saving discussions, make sure that we're making sure those workflows are efficient for parts purchasing and min maxes, reviewing those numbers, right? If we're stocking too much or not enough, we're wasting costs there. So really more so focusing in on those cost saving measures and also timelines. So private fleets usually move a little faster than public fleets do through the implementation process. Not saying across the board, but we do try to manage the timeline as efficiently as we can, understanding that there are different needs there in the private sector.
Awesome. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. That's all the time that we've got for today. But for anyone who asked a question that wasn't answered, we will be following up via email. We really do hope you all enjoyed today's webinar. And I want to again thank Thomas Mayer and AssetWorks for today's presentation. I also want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Automotive Fleet website, automotivefleet.com/webinars. Thank you so much. And thank you, Thomas. And we hope all of you have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Thank you, everyone.